victory once again. William Regal turned around and he actually peed on the Big Show's leg.
Number 13 is about to pop off, and I don't just mean that is the amount of beers we've had before we recorded this. This is Beyond the Beermat. My name is Stuart Quigley. Alongside me is...
Alright, it's Matt. Alright.
You got like slightly more of an intro there. Maybe one day we will develop to a second name. A gimmick name, perhaps?
Nah.
So in terms of like trying to sort of... If there are any fans of yours out there, they're looking for... Do you know what? I really like that, Matt, from Beyond the Beermat, and that's not a gimmick in and of itself, because you don't have any gimmicks. It's real names, no gimmicks. Real first names, no real second names, no gimmicks.
It's just Matt.
It's not Opie Trice, it's Matt.
Sure.
But if there were anyone out there that's like, I really like that guy, I need to see what he's doing, I need to like go to him on social medias and be like, yes, I'm a big fan of yours, they'd have to type in a search engine, Matt.
Matt. Sure, it's just go on Facebook, type in Matt.
Eventually.
The first person that shows up, that'll do. It's fine.
I like the idea that in about 100 episodes we get to a point where there are a load of actual random Matts from around the world that'll be like, why are we getting all this credit?
It's fine. That's what I'm all about, Steve. Just
Spread the love.
Yeah, exactly. Let everyone enjoy it. It's fine, man.
I like it. It's very noble of you to sort of spread the credit for the sterling work you do in this podcast through all the other Matts around the world.
We have this intrinsic bond. Anyone that's got the Matt in their name, anyway, it doesn't matter. If it's
even in the
name,
podcast.
Surname,
Beyond the Beer Matt as an example.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
Just look for Beyond the Beermat, it'll be fine. Don't worry, you'll find me eventually.
Yeah, alternatively, you could sort of send me a message and then I'll direct you to the exact right one. Or will I?
Oh, don't do that.
What, send it to someone else?
I don't want these cunts seeing me. Fuck off.
Jeez, what a heel turn. What
Episode 13.
The episode that Matt turns heel. That's the official name. Okay, what we've got is, once again, absolutely stacked episodes, but we've got on the horizon, over the peak, if you look into the distance, we can see the old slam of the summer, Summerfest, if you will, if you're Jeremy Piven, coming up. And before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to quickly go over this idea of like, what do they call it these days? The biggest party of the summer?
Yes.
Do they still call it that?
Yes.
Okay, fair enough. The whole idea of like, it used to be one of the, it's always been one of the big four. Mm-hmm. And as the big four became less and less, I don't know why the big four became like not a big four anymore. Is it just because no one cared about Survivor Series and big three doesn't matter?
No, it's because they're oversaturated the market, Stuart.
Oh, fair enough.
It's because they put too much shit out in the first place. It's sort of diluted the remaining four that was there. If you keep putting water on top of orange concentrate, you just end up with water. That's the problem.
That's exactly what WWE did. Water and orange concentrate. And that orange was in no way reference to any slightly tanned wrestlers that we spoke about in the last podcast. So, originally one of the big four. I don't know why it became the big two, and the big two wasn't the Royal Rumble and WrestleMania, but apparently SummerSlam became the de facto next one.
Yeah.
And WWE, a few years ago, tried to make SummerSlam a huge deal, to the point where we had SummerSlam Access, it was held in LA, it was like, this is the summer, the party of the summer, as you referred to. The first time they did SummerSlam Access was 10 years ago. So I think it was 2009 or 2008, I think it was 2009. And then the really weird thing is that they tried to big up this whole idea of SummerSlam being sort of almost attached to WrestleMania. Do you know how like back in the day it used to be feuds would end at WrestleMania? We get into this really weird sort of era where feuds would start at WrestleMania and end at SummerSlam.
Yeah, it's only a small period to actually play out a whole feud, isn't it? But I'll tell you what, it's a good sort of a 3-month period to actually test the waters. If a pay-per-view's not going to work, and it's actually launched at WrestleMania, or the Super Monday Night Raw after WrestleMania, if that feud started on that Raw and it's not actually carrying its weight come SummerSlam, at least you've only spunked away 3 months. And what you've got to remember is the sort of summer period round till winter, or at least Royal Rumble come January, that's a down period anyway.
Yeah, the perfect one that springs to mind is Edge and The Undertaker.
Yeah.
In that they met for the first time at WrestleMania, and then they had that feud, and really good solid matches all the way up until SummerSlam, and I think they might have been the only two to actually main event both.
You have to refresh my memory. Was this the Undertaker versus Edge in Hell in a Cell?
Yeah.
where Edge decided to fall off a ladder and go all the way down to hell from a mighty, mighty chokeslam.
Indeed. I believe that Edge has spoke about this before, and the whole idea of that match, which again, I've said this before, he's not one of the guys that you first go to for having, like, being the greatest of all time, and he had a career that's cut short, so we have to bear that in mind as well. But like, a lot of the ideas that he has are fantastic, and the idea that he had for this match was basically like, every heel thing I've done to The Undertaker, I get paid back for in this match.
Yeah, which is essentially what a heel should be doing anyway. That's the whole point of a pay-per-view, because that sort of payoff, isn't it? What I'm thinking, from what you said, if Edge hadn't retired at such an early age, would he continue to be a main event person? You know, we're not trying to talk about Edge specifically, but if he continued on the career path that he was going on, given all of his history in terms of, let's not talk Sexton Hardcastle or anything.
One of the greatest kayfabe names of all time.
The greatest name, yeah. But in terms of everything he did through the mid-card, being a tag team champion, and then going on to be main event.
It's one of the all-time careers.
It is, it's a solid career.
And also, like, post-Attitude Era, you're going to call me out on this, I think he might even be like, he's definitely top 5, I might go top 3.
For real?
Yeah.
So you're talking post-Attitude Era. I'd have to agree, really, I think. In terms of post-Attitude Era, so who have you got? You've got Chris Benoit, the name that shan't be spoken. He's post-Attitude Era. He's Ruthless Aggression. You've got Eddie Guerrero.
Both careers are cut short for very different reasons.
Yeah. I'm not going to say JBL.
No, God.
John Cena, though.
John Cena's your definitely top 3, but John Cena's career doesn't exist in that incarnation without Edge.
No, I guess so. So then you're also considering Randy Orton.
No shot. Yeah, I'm not. I'm not considering.
Randy Orton's up there.
I'm not.
Randy Orton has to be up there.
Just because he's up there, don't mean I'm pulling him down.
Oh, okay.
For snakes and ladders, except actually that's the way Snakes went with his fucking coming to the ring on a big sperm. He went down.
That's right. Here's the Viper, the king of all snakes. And you got CM Punk. Am I missing like a major person?
CM Punk would have been higher up, but again, longevity.
Yeah.
I think it goes. You're going to hate me for this. I think your top 3 is Brock Lesnar's one up there as well.
Oh,
it's
that's
got to be
the one I forgot about.
But the only one I ask, and I always do this, and I hate the fact that I'm going to say this because I hate repeating myself, and you're going to groan. But where's Shawn Michaels on that list?
Fucker. That's where I am.
Okay.
Fucker. Shawn Michaels had his time.
I'm not disagreeing, but like all of his stuff is sort of post-Attitude Era. Yeah. And by the way, funny enough, we should mention this because the reason why I brought this up was because SummerSlam being that sort of card is that, like, if you look back to SummerSlam's past, specifically SummerSlam 2002, which was ironically enough, if this comes full circle and Brock Lesnar does actually turn up and sort of defend and or maybe lose his title, it's SummerSlam 2002 is the pay-per-view where he beat The Rock. The Rock put over an up-and comer, and also it's the pay-per-view where Shawn Michaels returned to fight Triple H. So SummerSlam is both intrinsically linked into those two guys that you would consider post-Attitude Era. It is also, if you go through the rest of the card, it is interesting because obviously Lesnar, The Rock, Shawn Michaels, Triple H. Now, I don't care what you're saying about how big you want to make SummerSlam as a deal in recent years. SummerSlam this year, it's going to be a big deal in terms of like the general landscape of wrestling, and I don't know how far it's changed, and I don't know if it's that sort of terrible residue of the Attitude Era that you've got these kind of guys on the card, but like I just mentioned, Lesnar, The Rock, Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Undertaker defeated Test. What the? I need to see the build-up and the feud for that. Rob Van Dam, Chris Benoit.
A solid match, I'd imagine.
Christian and Lance Storm defeated Booker T and Goldust. Solid, great, underrated tag team action.
It seems very Attitude Era, doesn't it, that match? But
they didn't care about tag teams, and we sort of slightly care. We've literally in, 16 years gone from we care about tag teams, just throw 4 guys together, to one rung above that, maybe.
Yeah.
Edge defeated Eddie Guerrero.
Which should be a fucking classic written all over it.
Indeed.
How long did it go on for?
12 minutes, 11:50.
Yeah, that's good enough time.
Ric Flair, Chris Jericho.
Bloody hell.
And then opening the show, Kurt Angle and Rey Mysterio. This card is stacked and jacked the fuck.
Oh, exactly. You put that on nowadays, bloody hell, buy rates are going through.
That's kind of a dream card, really, when you think
exactly.
And
Yeah, but
is
the
it
problem
more-
is, it's just lost in the ether, isn't it? It's another pay-per-view from yesteryear.
It's a pay-per-view that's noted for when Brock Lesnar first got the title.
Yeah.
But when you look at back,
Because he was about bloody, 20 years old?
well, he was the youngest until they decided to erase him with Randy Orton beating Chris Benoit.
Unbelievable, thinking how far back that was, and to think of that card nowadays, if you put that card on, well, now, bloody hell, you're telling me that the buy rates aren't going through the roof?
Is it genuinely just the sort of, we talk about the Attitude Era and sort of what happened afterwards as maybe like not capitalising on what you had, or it's just solidly not good enough these days, etc. But is this just the sort of bleed down from the fact that you've got so many good guys? Like SummerSlam this year, it doesn't matter what the final card is, you're not going to get one match that sort of entices you in the same sort of way that most of these matches do. They're going to be matches that grab you, and matches that are like, yeah, I want to see this, but nowhere near in the same way that, like, I'm not even talking nostalgically. Shawn Michaels Triple H back in 2002. I'm willing to bet the interest for that match then is better than the interest for any match now.
Yeah, but that's because you're buying into the characters still, aren't you? It's like what you said, it's the trickle down from the Attitude Era and all the stars that were made from yesteryear, and how they're not making that star power of the current roster. Who's Ric Flair facing?
Jericho.
Unbelievable. Now, if you put that on nowadays, imagine the nostalgia you get from these two major superstars that are actually making and pulling this match.
Forget the actual SummerSlam card. What's the 2018 equivalent of Ric Flair versus Jericho? Is it Jericho versus Rusev? And I'm being really generous there.
You are being very generous. Okay, so the way I see it is, you've got an old-timey top of the card person, so if you've got in Raw that's an old-timer nowadays, you haven't got anyone that's already built and established that career.
Yeah.
Maybe Kurt Angle at a push. And it's got a bit of heritage, it's got a bit of history behind them. And me, being the arsehole that I am, that never saw Chris Jericho as a main event person anyway, that always saw him as a top mid-card.
To be fair, WWF gave you no reason to see him as a main event person because they had him sort of job for a while. He won the Undisputed title,
which was the pinnacle and the turnaround point almost for Chris Jericho.
Yeah, but like the whole feud with Stephanie McMahon and him being Triple H and all that, just it soured you on him. Chris Jericho, for as good as he was up until this point, didn't come into his own for another good few years yet, which is fascinating when you think about that as a character.
So we've got Kurt Angle on one hand that's got the heritage, and who are you looking at that's a mid-card / main eventer?
Rollins?
Exactly. So Kurt Angle versus Rollins.
Tasty as fuck. I'll take that. I'll take that.
Tell a lie, listener. I'm buying into that idea.
Yeah.
The problem is though, because they've watered down the pay-per-views, like I've said, if you stick that on Backlash, if you stick that on Extreme Rules, if you stick that on, give me another B card pay-per-view, a B show.
Please hold my place in line. I don't want to leave my seat because I'm going for a piss. On pay-per-view.
Sure.
It's a bit long-winded, but I'm sure it's a pay-per-view.
That's the one. You stick that on any sort of mid-tier pay-per-view, no one's going to watch it. And that's because you've watered it down too much. And this is coming back to what we said many podcasts before. You're diluting the superstars too much. You're giving them too much exposure.
Interestingly enough, the one guy on this card that isn't already established is Brock Lesnar. And he's established in the main event by beating The Rock.
Nice. So you've made a star out of someone then?
We don't get that.
You don't get that nowadays.
No.
Yeah, but that's because you're not prepared to push anyone. Because Vinnie Mac and the Fed are too invested in what they've currently got in their current product. They're trying to make it work. And I know this is going back to what we said in episode 12. Make sure you give it a listen.
It's a bit precarious. It involves Hulk Hogan and racism. Go for it.
Yeah. What we said in the previous podcast is a company is only prepared so far to push what they've currently got and to try and make it work. And if it doesn't keep working, you need to keep pushing, hacking away at it. And that's what it seems with the Fed at the moment. It's alright for independent things, and I say this very loosely, but for TNA, Ring of Honor, Gorilla, New Japan, because they're not the big leagues of the Federation, they're prepared to try new things. When you're the Fed, when you're World Wrestling Entertainment, you can only invest so much money and keep pushing away at it.
That's the problem with that is that's when you're the top of the tree. You don't need to try any new things. You've got the whole market.
But you haven't. You haven't at the moment.
You've got the market of wrestling fans, and I know for a fact they keep sort of going
Well, why are
with
the
this
Fed not trying new things then? If
because
they've got the
they don't
market
need
share.
to. Because they're happy with the money they're getting.
Because
And they
kids are going to keep buying Roman Reigns fucking
Yeah.
t-shirts.
Ironically enough, we've actually sort of stumbled blindly, almost as if we were Boy George back when he made a cameo in the 80s, into the actual topic for this podcast, having gone through all of SummerSlam 2002 right through to today, which is this idea that like, you're talking about guys that are being made, and we talked about Brock Lesnar being the one guy that was made at that pay-per-view. It's interesting to see now that the guys that they're making, not completely, because they are making their quote-unquote own guys in NXT as well, guys that haven't had necessarily success elsewhere. But there is a heavy, and you never thought you'd say this 10 years ago, TNA influence in WWE today.
There is.
Especially at the top of the card on SmackDown.
AJ Styles versus Samoa Joe in SummerSlam. Two guys that have come up through the Indies, that have gone through TNA, that are potentially, I wouldn't say headline, because I can't see AJ Styles versus Samoa Joe headlining SummerSlam.
No.
But I can certainly see him being higher up the card because it's for their goddamn belt on SmackDown.
Well, we'll start with them two because they're the two most high-profile ones. The funny thing about AJ Styles is that when you look at him now, I still see him as a TNA guy, and this might be the sort of smarky nature of me, but like, TNA didn't make very many guys, but he was one of them.
Yeah, but is that on TNA or is that on AJ Styles?
It's on me, to be honest. Like, from what I watched. It's because AJ Styles had his career at TNA,
Yeah.
and they missed opportunity after opportunity into making him that guy. Look, AJ Styles sort of became Mr. TNA in spite of them rather than because of them. And Samoa Joe, fuck me, Jesus Christ. Talk about having a guy. Like, I remember back in the day, Samoa Joe, longest reigning Ring of Honor world champion. That run, going back to me in my younger smarky days when I actually had hair. I've still got hair, but I still had hair then. That's the joke. And every month it was like, will Samoa Joe lose the Ring of Honor title? Will Samoa Joe do this? Like, and it was like, he's going to go straight from Ring of Honor to WWE because he is so high profile. And it never happened. And then when he went to TNA, it was like, you can't miss with Joe. Joe is so good. He puts on great matches. And they had that one sort of confrontation with him and Kurt Angle. And I think it was Kurt Angle that did this, just headbutted him. And you're like, oh shit, Kurt Angle, Joe, can't miss. And then they spent like, I think 3 years just making Joe into Lex Luger.
Yeah.
So AJ Styles, it was bad for him, but it could have been a lot worse because as a testament to both those guys, the talent that they have, take them out of it. Joe at Ring of Honor, which is early in his career, and then AJ, when he leaves TNA, he goes to Japan, and I find it very hard to believe that Vince McMahon is watching tapes of TNA and going, there's AJ Styles character, like him turned into someone else there very briefly. But he was told about AJ because of what happened in Japan.
Yeah. Yeah, all day long, of course he was. That's AJ Styles making the most of the cards that's being dealt, though, isn't it?
And also as well, AJ Styles, one of the very few surprise entrances at the Royal Rumble recently. Even though it wasn't really a surprise, it was more...
Could it be? Is it him? Is it really him?
Yeah.
No, but I understand
when it's cutting on Roman Reigns' face and you don't know who it is.
Yeah. No, I understand what you mean though, in terms of it was a surprise entrance at the Royal Rumble. Like, no one could have predicted that.
There was a heavy, rumours that he was going to be there, but at the same time, you think to yourself, in that sort of, we've talked about this before, this cynical, awful wrestling fan nature of they're not, surely not. Like, AJ would be great in WWE, but they're not going to do that to us. They're not going to give us AJ Styles.
No.
Sure. That's kind of what leans it to the is it, could it be of Michael Cole, which is, that's what you're internally thinking.
Yeah.
And the weird thing about this is that we're talking about Brock Lesnar at SummerSlam 2002. We're talking about made stars. AJ Styles was a star before he walked into that arena. Mm-hmm. However, him walking out into that arena simultaneously made him a star.
That's the thing then. Are WWE actually still making stars? Are they making stars in terms of, if you look at the NXT roster at the moment, the majority of the people on there, so Gargano, Ciampa, Aleister Black, they've all made their name through the indies anyway. Are they in trouble of actually... do you think the issue is Vince McMahon's not prepared to push the people that he hasn't made himself?
I think the defining characteristic of this is why if you look at the guys that were WCW guys versus the whole reason why we're recording this podcast, the guys that you would call TNA guys, right? I don't think Vincent McMahon considers made in TNA as made.
Really? What, he still sees TNA as indies?
I can't speak for him, but you look at some of the way that, like, I'll give you a perfect example. AJ Styles walks in, and he gets that sort of push, right? Compare that to Sean O'Haire and Mark Jindrak as a tag team on SmackDown when the invasion happens. They're immediately, we have to get rid of everything that everyone liked about them.
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting that comparatively levels, AJ Styles is obviously a world-class main event talent. But the thing is that O'Haire and Jindrak were of a level where there could have been something made of them. There could have been something, I don't want to use this word, but I'm going to use this word, salvaged, if you want to go that far. But no, they were WCW. WCW were going to push them. They had to be eliminated.
It almost seems disrespectful then. So are you saying, like, is NXT almost like a death note to wrestlers? If you've made a name, what I'm trying to get is imagine AJ Styles hadn't debuted at the Royal Rumble and had gone in to NXT
like Joe, like Sami Zayn,
and gone through
Kevin Owens.
Yeah, Kevin Owens was there as well. Gone through the ranks of NXT where you're having amazing matches when you first debut, because all the smarks at Full Sail University are obviously loving you already from your indie work. If AJ Styles had still done that, would he have then got lost in the shuffle when it came to the main event push?
I'll go back.
AJ Styles as well. Sorry to interject, but it almost seems like if Samoa Joe had gone straight to the main event, or not straight to the main event, but straight to Raw or SmackDown, so the main shows, would he have been lost in the shuffle if he hadn't gone through NXT?
More so, but here's the caveat with this, right? Joe, AJ, Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, any of these guys that are big stars on the indie circuit. You can even go back further if you want and talk about Seth Rollins and Dean Ambrose, their previous iterations of gimmicks. They were all stars on the indies. And fucking Daniel Bryan, when he went into that system, was a huge star. The difference, I think, between all of those I've just mentioned and the one I mentioned at the very start, which is AJ Styles, is that, as I said before, I think it's a changing tide in the wrestling industry full stop. AJ Styles was a huge star already. All they had to do was shine light. And the only thing that's prevented Vince McMahon from shining the light on legit stars before is the fact that they came from WCW. Goldberg, Sting, DDP, Booker T.
Don't you mention DDP's name in vain again.
DDP, when he came to the Fed, you're telling me that guy deserved that?
He's a stalker, that's his gimmick.
Jeez.
He likes Sarah. He doesn't.
Michelle McCool, I'm guessing?
Yeah, same difference.
But that's what prevented Vince from doing that before. And now he doesn't necessarily have that. Whatever this says about TNA, I don't know. But you just notice, I'll go through some more actually. I want to go back to sort of, not the very start, but I'm interested to see what you make of this. So I've got a list of names in front of me. And I want to mention a guy who isn't really on TV a lot from TNA's early days, and I know AJ Styles is that as well, but a quote-unquote veteran, and he was TNA World Champion. And I'm not using this as an example of he's the guy everyone else followed, but R-Truth.
What a guy.
He's
what a guy.
A perfect example of someone that was in WWE before, or F as it may have probably been at the time, I'm guessing, I'm thinking. Goes to TNA, Ron Killings, becomes world champion, and for a long time you see this and you just go, this is what used to happen. This idea of guys would go to TNA, and he's not on this list, so no spoilers here, but Christian is an example of a guy that went to TNA to become a main event guy. And you could also argue Booker T went back to get another injection of pace in his system, and when R-Truth comes back to WWE, he's been there since, and he's held a very specific role, and I'm not suggesting that every guy from TNA should be that guy, but R-Truth isn't an AJ Styles, isn't a Samoa Joe, he isn't an indie darling.
No.
He's a guy that can do really well, And WWE saw that he could do really well in TNA and put him in this very specific role. And he's had ups and downs, and like the reasons for his downs following his ups are well documented. The Rock. But there's still something to be said for the first time you see a guy break through like that and just go, oh, do you know what? TNA aren't just full of jobbers. Because back then you would have thought they didn't have any made guys at that point because they were too young as a company. So you have to have the first one. And there's another name I want to mention actually. We're going all over the place with the timelines here. But there's a guy I want to mention who is a very modern day TNA guy. As far as I'm concerned, you're going to shit all over me here. Controversy, according to Eric Bischoff, it creates cash. In his podcast, it creates a talking point. Matt Hardy.
Oh, don't we mention Matt Hardy? He can't jump. From K Quick, where I wanted to do his little rap when he originally appeared with Road Dogg Jesse James many moons ago in 2000.
I'm talking about a guy whose gimmick never changed versus a guy whose gimmick changed dramatically.
Can I do the rap now?
If you want.
Thanks. Oh, you didn't know, you better call somebody. The D-O-double-G, K Quick, get rowdy. Blah, 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 blah. You can't jump from K Quick to Matt Hardy, alright? I completely understand where you're coming from, though, and I completely agree with old Matthew
It's a really
Hardy.
weird one because Matt Hardy's a very made guy in WWE, but he's a made guy in a very...
Is he a made guy in WWE?
He is because...
He's a perennial mid-carder. I'm sorry, Stu, but if we're going to push one of the Hardys, go for the one with the colourful hair, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, there is a reason why I'm not mentioning Willow here.
Oh, sure.
But that being said, the reason why I'm mentioning Matt Hardy in this and why I think it's sort of a weird one to mention, because if you cut Matt Hardy TNA, if his iteration, if that doesn't exist, he's still what you know he is, which is not what you can say for a lot of these guys.
No, I understand where you're coming from. Like, it almost seems like watching as an outsider and not being a complete smark. TNA gave him that boost of life, or that kick up the arse, where it told him to get himself into gear. If your passion, which we've seen from the Hardys 24/7 network special, or a DVD they had absolutely donkeys years ago, Matt Hardy and Jeff Hardy always had that passion for wrestling, and it seems like they've obviously had this undying passion for wrestling. And so...
And Matt seems the smarter of the two as well in terms of like coming up with stuff.
Yeah, it's certainly making it work for him anyway. If you're going to start going off the rails and actually getting the TNA writers to buy into this idea of, I'm going to take one man and a camera and start filming your own vignettes and
Even
making it work.
before you have the whole broken Matt Hardy stuff, Matt Hardy had sort of reinvented himself on the indies a few times.
TNA certainly seems to have turned his career around. Unfortunately, it seems, whilst the Fed has brought the Hardy Boys back, Jeff Hardy now seems to be stuck in some sort of unfortunate loop with your man Randy Orton. Hooray, that can only get more and more positive and more exciting.
Ironically enough, we were talking about the idea of like bringing broken Matt Hardy back into the WWE and that, all the connotations of that. For some reason, we're definitely, and I know we mentioned him already in this podcast, we're definitely getting Willow at some point, which I think this is what's
No, I
leading
wouldn't be
to.
surprised, because I do think it is leading to this. A few weeks back of SmackDown, as Randy Orton's whispering into Jeff Hardy's ear and pulling his, I don't know, what's that one in called? Yeah, pulling at his earlobe and his flesh wound or whatever it's called, wherever you have a bloody great big stud put in there. Afterwards, Jeff Hardy does cut a promo where he mentions the word broken. Uh-oh, that's the important word. And it seems to be bringing, like, in terms of full swing, coming back to the whole broken Matt Hardy gimmick. So I wouldn't be surprised if Willow does show up sooner or later.
I do like the idea though that you've got two guys that were very, very over in the WWE before and iconic sort of matches, and they have their own story up until this point, and it's a very big deal. All the other characters that we've spoke about in this podcast, all the characters that we're going to continue to talk about, they're sort of moving themselves from TNA to WWE. It's not necessarily involved a lawsuit, whereas this has. That's how much effort we are. Like, imagine the idea of Sting or Goldberg coming into WWE in 2002 and there's a lawsuit blocking it or legal proceedings blocking it. Oh wait, no they didn't, because they didn't come in because they actually had contracts and they didn't want to violate them.
I think it comes back to the way that Vince McMahon actually looks at wrestlers. The thing you got to remember is when Jeff Hardy originally bailed out at WWE, he was a world champion. He beat Triple H on Raw. I don't know if he beat Triple H on a pay-per-view.
His various different ones include various different high-profile victories, definitely.
Yeah, he certainly made a name for himself. Then there's the whole angle of Matt Hardy screwing them over over in there a tables match or something, or it wasn't a TLC match, it was only like a chairs or a tables match.
Ironically, how many times Jeff and Matt Hardy fought each other in WWE and how bland it was every single time.
Yeah, it never
versus how
seemed to
it
have
then
the payoff.
transpired today.
Yeah, Jeff Hardy was a main eventer when he actually bailed out. He had a few iffy matches with Matt Hardy in between, but then always went back to the main event where he feud with Triple H and almost reached the title before he disappeared. What's the difference? And I think because you've got a bloody great big bloke that is Bobby Lashley, and you've got a sort of skinnier bloke that is Jeff Hardy, that's what's holding him back still.
Interestingly enough, Bobby Lashley was also in TNA.
He was.
And he
also made a name for himself as well.
I think the difference, as you're questioning this idea of like between the two, is that Jeff Hardy is a known commodity.
Yeah.
Bobby Lashley wasn't a known commodity in the eyes of the WWE fans. He's a known commodity in the wrestling business, but not necessarily in the eyes of the WWE fans. So, whereas you can plug Jeff Hardy into your main event whenever you necessarily want to, the only real good chance you're going to have of doing it with Lashley is straight away.
This will sound like a really controversial and almost contrived point. Poor old Jeff Hardy, does it almost seem that Matt Hardy's holding him back by everything Matt Hardy did at TNA? Is he now holding Jeff Hardy back, knowing that Jeff Hardy has to still go through the whole broken Matt Hardy gimmick, which by the time it's over, and we already know he stopped doing swanton bombs, so he's already past it, unfortunately, is that holding his career back?
It's sort of almost the blessing and the curse in a sense, because if he didn't have this going for him, what would he have? I'm talking Jeff Hardy here, not Matt, because we know for a fact that I think it's really clever position-wise for WWE. After all this time, you have the Hardys reunion, we get the whole idea of them coming back, and yay, people I used to remember from back in the day.
Yeah.
And then the whole feeling was, when are we getting broken Matt Hardy? And then we got a version of it and it was shit, and then they have finished the lawsuit and we got a sort of better version of it and it's still not quite what we had before. But I think WWE have positioned themselves in a very specific way, which is the way you get the full-on Matt Hardy that we want to get has to be Jeff that does it.
Yeah,
has to be Matt versus Jeff. So you keep them apart. You got the Wyatt Matt Hardy thing on one side, you got the Jeff Hardy Willow thing on the other side, which will play a part, whether he comes out as him or not, definitely will.
Yeah.
And then eventually you'll have some sort of combine the two, and then we go. Whereas you're saying, like, is he handcuffed to it? I think the answer is yes and no. He's ultimately destined to become that again, but at the same time I'd go, if your body's already giving out on you now, what alternative do you have?
You can't say no, because he's already pushing 40 anyway. He might look young for his age, and he might still dye his hair.
Given what he's done,
colours.
and I don't necessarily mean in the ring.
Yeah, but he's getting on, so eventually. The problem is though, because such a big deal was made outside of WWE for the whole Matt and Jeff Hardy angle being broken and Willow and all of this, whatever else was going on, but all of the angle that was going, it almost seems like creative have nothing more for you. When Matt and Jeff Hardy actually then get together again and they play out the whole TNA angle all over again, but with different substitutes to wrestle against whenever that happens, there's not going to be anything else for them, and I think they're going to be too far gone. I think they'll be out the door.
I disagree with you in this sense, only in this sense, right? When the TNA stuff was going down and you saw about like the ultimate deletion and all this, it both excited me and frightened me in this sense, in that like Matt's doing all this wacky, crazy stuff. Where do you go from here? Because I didn't think there was a part 2 to that.
Yeah.
And ironically enough, Jeff Hardy became part 2 because like you wouldn't necessarily associate between the two of them, Jeff Hardy having that kind of charisma, but him and Matt as a team in the broken universe, as it were, made not only so much sense, but so much money. So to suggest that there's nowhere to go after this, I mean neither, because everything is a rehash.
I'm sorry, Stu, I'm going to have to interject yet again. I've already thought of it. As we're sat in here talking, I've already found the new angle.
Go on.
Sister Abigail, Matt Hardy breathes in the life essence of Bray Wyatt, because they're going to split up now that they've lost the belts to the B team. he breathes in the life essence. Sister Abigail comes back. Who's Sister Abigail?
I know you can say already.
Only bloody Lita. Would you believe it? Would you believe it?
Have you ever seen that Denzel Washington film, Fallen?
No, I once watched The Bone Collector though.
Yeah.
That was good.
So you're telling me you've watched the film with Denzel Washington in it?
Yeah, once.
Basically, effectively, at the end of the start of that film, it's like, I'll tell you about a demon that inherited souls or whatever. And then the start of the film is the end. So basically what you're saying is that Lita and the Hardy Boys, so Team Extreme is almost from the future, and that's how the Hardy Boys and Lita came to be.
It'll be like Terminator 2, like,
Yeah,
it was
exactly.
fucking brilliant.
Exactly. There's only one way to go from there, and that's to bring it home. And I don't mean by finishing the podcast, I mean I want to talk about a guy that was TNA, and he's from our home of Bromtown, USA.
Yeah.
Drake Maverick, Rockstar Spud.
The new commissioner of 205 Live.
Indeed.
And when I say new, I mean about 6 months ago.
This is a guy who we've seen in person, we've met, we've sort of inhabited, well, I would say inhabited a ring, but we didn't fight him or anything, we just sort of were there.
You didn't even pay to get his signature either. I wanted to get in the ring with him to get my photograph and my signed autograph, but that I couldn't be asked.
Did you actually follow his like TNA Tough Enough run thing?
What was it, boot camp with El Snow or some shit like that?
What was it? It must have had a better name than that, but off the top of my head I can't think of it.
TNA boot camp.
Really?
I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was. I don't know much about Rockstar Spud. And I sure as shit know that since living in Birmingham for the last 8 years, no one's been called Maverick, or no one's been called Drake at least.
I agree.
No one has that name in Birmingham.
All I'm going to say is the idea that there's a guy that exists in the WWE who is from Birmingham, is quite pale and skinny, comparatively speaking to normal human beings. Not me, I'm fat, but supports Everton as well. It feels like a sort of bizarro Superman version of me.
You say pale and skinny,
Yeah.
bleach blonde hair,
Yeah.
very orange skin. One's Drake Maverick, one's the president.
Oh god.
Hey.
Oh god. I actually think Drake Maverick would make a great president, purely for the fact of like a Bramu would be in charge. I'll take it.
Yeah, but I haven't seen what he's been doing at 205.
No, it's just the idea that like you've got a guy who, when we said this before on I've said this before on a previous podcast. This idea when you see guys live, you have a very distinct, different reaction to their physique, as it were, than when you see them on TV. And our reaction to seeing him live, to meeting him in person, was very much one of, oh, you're actually that small then.
Yes, hooray. I weigh 2 stone more than you, you scrawny bastard.
And I'm going to try and link this seamlessly, that he made himself a name in TNA and is now making himself a name in the Feds, is also, sort of, comparatively speaking, the idea that he is partly EC3, because that was the idea that they were brought in together. They weren't brought in together, but they were putting a storyline together. They both sort of helped each other get to where they were, and now obviously EC3 is in NXT and
Drake's
Rockstar Drake is in 205 Live. But then I've got 2 left before we go on this, before we wrap this up, and there's one that is, I don't know, we're still yet to be seen, and one that needs to sort of change. The one that I don't know yet is what's going to happen to Eric Young.
That's a toughie. That's a difficult question. I'll tell you for what. The problem is, Daniel Bryan was on his rise and ultimate decline almost, the original time round at WWE before he came back. The way I saw Eric Young was always the Daniel Bryan position.
Of TNA.
Yeah. You had this smaller bloke that could obviously perform well in the ring,
and had a lot of history and credibility with the audience in terms of he'd been there for ages, and he just sort of quote-unquote suffered, as it were.
Yeah, he'd done the job, essentially. He'd worked his way up to where he was.
In a weird sense, like a Tommy Dreamer style, but not quite.
Yeah, I understand. He had the fans behind him, even though he might have not been the biggest bloke, he might have not been the biggest star, but I always saw Eric Young as the Daniel Bryan position. I think the problem is, like we were implying earlier on, I think, unfortunately, because Eric Young's only gone in, or hasn't made big enough of a name of himself in TNA, And so he's had to go through the whole NXT sort of network side of things. Not the network, but the workway, the waterworks of NXT. I think he's going to be one of the ones that gets lost in the shuffle.
I think there is a huge difference though between Eric Young finding some success in TNA versus, and again, I know these are opposite ends of the scale, what we talked about before, AJ Styles. Like, Eric Young has had some success, and I think this comes down to this idea of what we said before, of like, Vince wouldn't push guys that made their way in WCW, that were really big in WCW.
Yeah.
Vince wouldn't push mid-carders. So this idea of like Eric Young, for as high as he was or is, this idea that he's got himself a spot.
Yeah.
It's more than you would get, I would say, in previous incarnations, maybe. And what they do with that spot, I don't know. I really think it's touch and go. I think they could have made a bigger deal about Sanity coming over. I think they could have made a much bigger deal about, like, just did they not drop him out on like week 2 or week 1?
He lost in the first 2 weeks with Sanity.
Yeah, that does not give you optimism for the future, so to speak. So in that regard, then, the one. You're talking about guys from TNA that have reached a certain level, are at a certain level, and have been at like a main event caliber style. That brings us on to the last guy I wanted to talk about. And you're talking about a guy that, like, I'm quote unquote worried about Bobby Roode.
All day long, he's in trouble. He's not part of Vince McMahon's super club of homemade stars that weren't from WCW.
It's weird that though, because you feel like everyone's getting a chance. And he's kind of got a chance.
Yeah, but it almost seems, what I'm going to say is, it almost seems like, if I'm in Vince McMahon's shoes, it's like, I'll give you 3 weeks to each of these superstars. If you make it work, you make it work. It doesn't matter if you came from WCW, TNA or the Indies, if you don't make it work, too bloody bad. If you're a WWE guy, it's alright, don't worry about it, I'll give you 6 weeks. If not, I'll give you a whole year, it doesn't matter. But if you came from TNA, you're 3 weeks. Make it work, or you're not on the show. And I think that's going to be the same for Eric Young. I think it'll be the same for Bobby Roode. And I think the only way Samoa Joe's got away with it is because of being injured.
In that regard then, is Bobby Roode like, not even a double-edged sword, almost like some sort of triple-edged trident? Because he's got that, and then he's got what you said in terms of making an instant impact. He's got the idea that he's not a WWE guy. I would argue that he's one of these guys that suffers from this idea of, and this has happened in the past, but he's the highest profile one that I could think of this, is that the idea of you being an NXT guy.
Well, I think that'll certainly save him.
I think right now it hurts him.
What?
Because all he's got is
NXT
injuries.
heritage. Yeah, but that's all he has got. But to be fair, he wasn't a brilliant wrestler at TNA. I think, if I'm being honest, Bobby Roode rode the coattails of the whole beer money angle. I think the beer money angle actually worked out for him because it was a quality gimmick.
Okay, then let me rewind that even further. James Storm. Went to NXT. Nothing.
No, because maybe, we're saying nothing, but you don't know James Storm personally, so
Rewind that
maybe
even
James
further. James Storm, Chris
decision.
Harris, America's Most Wanted, Braden Walker, one of the all-time fails.
That was before NXT time though. At least NXT gives you time rather than poor old Christopher Harris or Braden Walker walking out.
He did get a lot fat though in WWE's defence.
Yeah, he put on a few pounds, but so what? Everyone does.
I've lost more pounds at William Hill and or at many gambling establishments than he gained in that time.
He walked out, he didn't have the smaller exposure that you certainly get where you can sort of learn the basics.
In a weird way, it's the
Learn your
first
ways at
attempt at
NXT.
WWE to try and get a success from TNA to translate. Because America's Most Wanted back in the day, SmackDown Raw were taking both of them.
I guess so, but...
Like, admittedly, tag team wrestling is a whole different conversation, but like the idea that like at the time when Chris Harris and James Storm were what they were, WWE television needed that.
Yeah, but would you have taken, of everyone you could have taken at the time from TNA, is Christopher Harris the one you would have taken
I would
from
take
TNA?
both. That's the whole point. What I'm saying is that like you take both, and then you get to a point where
Yeah,
like,
but the thing is, what we're trying to get at is the fact that if you've taken James Storm and Christopher Harris as America's Most Wanted, and you stuck them on TV on a Raw or SmackDown, so not put them through the whole NXT system, would they have still worked, or would they have been just bait for Vince McMahon's established boys and just put them across as jobbers still? Would you have just made them local talent?
The only thing I would say as an argument against that is that in theory America's Most Wanted was sort of formed as bait.
Yeah.
If you can rise above that in TNA, the whole argument is if you can get over anywhere, you can get over anywhere. Mm-hmm. So maybe. But the point I was trying to make is that like the Chris Harris thing leads to James Storm going on his own, which leads to eventually Beer Money, which leads to Bobby Roode versus James Storm, which legitimises both of them.
Yeah.
And then we get to a point where you say about like, oh, I'm not sure about Bobby Roode the wrestler. So you say the same about like many different people. But like one of the few things I would say is that they made Bobby Roode a top guy.
No, his entrance music made him a top guy.
No, TNA made Bobby Roode a top guy, and then NXT made him a top guy with a top entrance. And then when he gets to the main roster, you're like, he's supposed to be a top guy with a top entrance, and you realise has actually got either.
You've got a decent entrance, but when you keep recycling it 100 times over,
it's also harder to do it in a bigger arena than it is in NXT.
Yeah, it will be all day
NXT fans, without meaning to I'm not slamming them, I'm just saying this is the way it is. They just mark for a lot of things that mainstream WWE audiences want.
Yeah, but the thing is that NXT, for the majority, all we know about is the main pay-per-views. We don't watch NXT on a weekly basis, and half the time they don't bother giving him that super entrance. They just have him march out to the ring wearing a robe or whatever. They don't bother. They might cut to the music and then he walks out and it's like, Bobby Roode's here because the Hill's cutting a promo, but they don't give him the whole sort of here's a man sat in the spotlight playing a piano, or here's a great big orchestra that are doing it, or here's a choir.
You talk about like destroying some guy's aura.
Yeah.
This whole idea of like, I don't think for the entire run of Bobby Roode in the WWE, I'm ever going to get rid of the image of him trying to twerk with the Nuda. I don't think I'm ever going to take him seriously as a top guy because that one moment, but that's what they do.
I can't ever respect Triple H because he did an Indian dance with Jinder Mahal, and so I can't ever see him as a legitimate guy again. Anyway, the way I see it is, it suits what's ever best for you. If James Storm had stuck around for long enough for Bobby Roode to show up,
especially considering TNA buried him on their programming.
What, by pushing Mickey James onto the railroad tracks?
No, that was after that. It was the fact that
James... This is after he was on it.
No. The James Storm. This is okay. I'm going to probably get my timeline wrong here because we're talking about TNA, so we're allowed to like dedicate a segment to TNA bullshit, which is that James Storm left to go to NXT during a tournament. They did not drop James Storm out of the tournament rankings at any point during the time he was left. What they did do is have a TV program where it's like running down the whole of the tournament, and then they went, who's the up and comer in the tournament, who's been the best guy in the tournament, who's been the worst guy in the tournament, and then one of the awards, if you want to call it that, was who's been the most surprising terrible person in the tournament. They went James Storm has been the most terrible person in the tournament because we thought he'd be a lot better. It's like, yes, because he fucked off to a better promotion, you absolute awful people. And they tried to bury him, and then he came back after that for some reason. And then a few months after that, storyline-wise, that was when he pushed Mickey James and killed her IRL, kayfabe, on the railroad tracks. If you don't believe me, Google. I've not exaggerated any of that. James Storm did legitimately push Mickey James in front of a train and kill her.
So, talking about TNA talent that have come up through the ranks, done a bit of indies, and now gone to NXT or the Fed. What is the future of EC3?
I think it's very much an amalgamation of everything because EC3 is a WWE guy first and foremost. NXT, Patrick Bateman, the sort of potential teaming with Daniel Bryan, which I think will be leaned upon at some point, if nothing else, as like a last resort, pull emergency cord to get him over. Yeah. He's got himself over and he can get himself over, but the whole idea of like him being released when he was, and if you listen to him give interviews, I heard a podcast with him and Edge Christian a few weeks ago, and the way he talks about the business is that like it's a guy that's going to get himself over in any scenario. I would say that I do worry about how they're going to treat him, but I do think the bottom line fact of yes, he got himself over in TNA, yes, he was that successful. I think the bottom line fact is that he was discovered there is the thing that's going to see.
That's going to help him.
Yeah.
You could almost say that's the same as what's going to happen to Drew McIntyre now. He's decided to rear his ugly face again.
I wouldn't necessarily say he made himself in TNA, that he made himself back on the indies, but he was there.
He was always the chosen one. And so it would be a brilliant full circle if he does manage Dolph Ziggler to some extent and then go on to actually do something worthy once he drops.
Anyone that makes Dolph Ziggler interesting is doing something like they're doing the Lord's work at that point.
Yeah. So what are we saying then? To finalise, to wrap this up, Stu?
Does it matter these days if you come from somewhere else, or is this whole idea of TNA guys going to WWE being successful, is that an anomaly? Is that a thing? We started the podcast talking about SummerSlam in 2002 and this whole idea of like Brock was the only unmade guy and they made him, and this whole idea of like you can't rely on old guys. Because there aren't that many old guys left. If you talk about an old guy now, they're not going to make anyone. Meeting them isn't going to make them. So we have to find a different way of making them. And the modern way, the different way of making a guy, is letting him do it somewhere else.
I think it comes down to the whole bravado and machismo of Vince McMahon, basically, where I think where you're old-timey, or at least being passed the torch from his old-timey father, Vince Senior, where you have to breed and brood your own talent and you can't have outsiders coming in. I think that's the issue. Thankfully, there's the shining light in the distance, which is, who would have suspected it, Triple H, where he's introducing this new talent through NXT.
Triple H putting over new talent?
Yeah, would you believe
What?
it? That's going to ultimately be the saving grace for WWE.
I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, but we have to sort of pack it all back in because this is the end of the podcast, and this has been Beyond the Beermat. We have been with you for at least 13 fantastic episodes. We'll get back to you for 13 more, and about add to a few O's to that as well.